Chambers defended himself very well, very strong defense, and the right kind of defense. No CSI back then, but he brought in these documents and stories which verified that he knew that his had communist ties, that he was lying about everything else. This was enough to cause a grand jury to indict his. He was then charged and tried by again, a regular jury, found guilty of perjury and sentenced to jail. Of course, the Democrats, they never forget when people do things like that to them. Chambers was then blackballed from employment. He had an offer from Luce, I forget Luce's, he had several publishing groups. He walks in to go to work, and by the way, his job was he was a translator of foreign language books. He walks in on the first day to go to work. He's called into one of the vice president's office and told that they've rescinded the offer. He never could get employment in that Boston, New York, Washington corridor from anyone that had anything to do with the Democratic Party after that. He did write a book. It was very successful, and he received a lot of temporary employment, I think, from a number of Republicans. You know, he went from job to job, but that's how he supported himself for the rest of his life, because the Democrats flat out blackballed him. Now you do something like that so that the next guy down the road doesn't want to tell the truth. They're afraid to. And if you've been following the VA investigations, this week they've had a string of witnesses who are whistleblowers, and they've all mentioned that in one way or another, their jobs and their employment were challenged if they repeated the charges that they made in-house to anyone out-house. So again, you see the same tactic of intimidation being used time and again, and apparently successfully in some cases. Okay, so let's summarize HUAC and what happened. First, they tried to write it out. A recent scandal that they've written out that today's Democrats have written out pretty well. How about Fast and Furious? You know, we were arming the Mexican cartels, and they got away with it because nobody seems to care. Then they circled the wagons around the target. They tried to destroy Chambers' credibility. When they circled the wagon, they used the heavyweights to circle the wagon. They tried to destroy Chambers' credibility. And when everything else failed, then they blackballed Chambers to send a message to any future whistleblower that that's what will happen to him. All right, McCarthy. The Army, we call the Army McCarthy. McCarthy. Who knows why he got in trouble? Somebody want to tell me why McCarthy was so hated?
I'm too young. Where did I get my news?
I know he got in some problem with Eisenhower in the Army, and I just...
You're close.
Talking about? Okay.
Yes, you're close. You want to go forward or?
No, I think you ought to pick that.
All right. He asked a very fundamental question over and over and over. And that question was, how can 300 suspected Soviet agents be employed by our government? Where is the security? What is the security? How does this happen time and again, and is probably still happening right now? That was what McCarthy really did. He asked the big question, how? Who's responsible for this? Who's supposed to stop this? It wasn't that he called Hiss a communist. He attacked the entire system, which included the military and the political apparatus. Now, a lot of people think that McCarthy failed, and it's probably pretty easy to see why when we go a little further. But Ann Coulter, her book Treason, which I would recommend. And really, you only have to read about the first 125 pages to get all that I'm giving you. The rest of it, she carries this stuff forward. She believes that he won this whole thing because what he did was he openly asked that question. He openly attacked the Soviets, and he woke up the American people to what was happening in Washington. And even though he became a casualty in the end, he's the one man that did the most to stop the penetration of our government by the Soviet agents. He was really quite an interesting guy. I think he was born 1908 or something like that in Wisconsin. He didn't go to high school. He didn't go to high school because he started his own egg business. And he was making a lot of money until the beginning of the Depression when the business went kaput. Well, he's 20 or 21 years old, the business is shot, the economy is shot. He figures he better pursue another career path. He goes back to high school and does 4 years of high school in 1 year. 4 years of high school in 1 year. Goes on, graduates from college, and becomes a lawyer. Now, you know, this is not some guy with a drinking problem, as he was later described. World War, he goes on, becomes a lawyer, then he gets elected to a county judge position. After the war, he defeated for the Senate a fellow named Robert La Follette. Perhaps none of you know that name, but La Follette was one of the progressives around the turn of the century and into the 20th century. Had a huge name. McCarthy, a nobody, managed to beat him in that Senate race in 1946. But anyway, World War II breaks out. McCarthy is draft exempt. Why? Because he is a sitting judge, and all sitting judges are exempt from service in the military. What did he do? He enlisted in the Marines. Became an intelligence officer and was a captain in the Marines. And what he used to do was debrief the crews, the bomber crews. Yes, sir.
I have a picture I'm going to pass around that shows him working with one of those crews.
So anyway, he's there. This isn't enough service for him. All he's supposed to do is debrief these guys. He decides he needs to get up. Now, I'm telling you, it wasn't all patriotic. He really had he wanted a political career later. But he goes up with these planes and he's a tail gunner. That's what they call him, Tail Gunner Joe. He went on at least a dozen missions. He had Japanese pilots shooting at him in anger, and he was shooting at them in anger. But he was out in the war. This is a guy that had a draft exemption. But he went and served in combat. He won a Distinguished Airman's Award for that service, and that became another thing the Democrats used against him. There was supposed to be a rule that there were so many flights that you were supposed to take. He did not apparently have that many flights. But he got his Distinguished Service Cross award anyway, and he probably had a lot to do with that, pushing the paper and the people and whatever. But he was up there shooting it out with the Japanese pilots. Now, I contrast that to a fellow named Lyndon Baines Johnson, our president from 1963 to 1968, technically 69, who won a Silver Star in World War II. Did you guys know Lyndon Johnson had a Silver Star?
He was a passenger in a bomber.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. He was one of about a dozen members of Congress who would periodically leave Congress and go to the Pacific and totally try and run the war effort. FDR wound up telling not only Johnson, but all these guys, make up your mind. You're either an officer in the military or you're in Congress here. Johnson chose Congress. But while he was going around and doing what he did when he was serving the military, he got up in a plane. 2 members of the crew described it as he was up with us for 15 or 20 minutes, ordered us all around, told us we were a bunch of dummies, ordered that we come back home and land the plane, which they did. For that, Lyndon Johnson received a Silver Star. Now, if that's a bunch of hooey, by pushing the rules, you know, it just blows my mind that that happened. But if McCarthy, whatever, pushed that rule on how many flights you had to take, it's nothing compared to what Lyndon Johnson did for a much higher award. I mentioned that he beat Robert La Follette, which was just a family name in Wisconsin, for the Senate in 1946. He was pretty much of an unknown, quiet senator the first 2 or 3 years in the Senate. Then in Wheeling, West Virginia in 1950, he made his comments about the penetration of the Soviets in our government, and that launched his career. That's also the speech where some people say he looked at the Heinz ketchup bottle and said there are 57 communists. That never happened. McCarthy was a politician. By definition, he did some embellishing. He knew there were communists. I believe, or most people believe, that he said there were 180 communists when asked as a follow-up to that press conference, that speech in Wheeling, West Virginia. He attacked, again, not individual communists. Everybody thinks he ran around calling people communists. He accused very few individuals of being communists, but he was constantly attacking the establishment. He went after Congress, he went after the military, he went after the army about the lax security.